Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it. The name of the talk is Fun with Sitecore JSS, Exploring GraphQL. I'm Adam Lamarre. Just a little bit about me. I've been working with Sitecore since 2011. I'm currently a principal developer at Lamarre, based in Boston, Massachusetts. I was honored to be named a 2019 Sitecore Technology MVP. And lately I've been blogging about some things at adamlamarre.com, mostly JSS things. And I'm currently in the middle of a series called Building with Sitecore JSS, where I'm building like a bootstrap blog template, start to finish. Building out all the components step by step. So, if that's something you're interested in, feel free to check it out. But I didn't include the most important thing about me on the slide. And the most important thing about me is I have a dog. She sleeps pretty much 23 hours a day, and she's eating the other hour. And this is clearly one of the transition steps, between those two. So the other thing I didn't put on the slide is that I love GraphQL. And I don't really think this is totally accurate, but I think it's probably more like this. I don't think that's accurate either. But anyway, so my GraphQL story kind of started last year when I was exploring a static site generator named Gatsby JS. And if you've never used a static site generator before, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Your site's built at compile time instead of at runtime, so it leads to some really performance sites. And what's unique about Gatsby is it actually represents its data internally as GraphQL. So around the same time, I learned that Sitecore is starting to ship out GraphQL endpoints. So we put two and two together. My coworker Brian and I did a presentation last year at Symposium where we built a static site with Gatsby with GraphQL endpoints powering it. So that's sort of where it started. And I mentioned that story because not because I'm going to be talking about Gatsby a lot in this presentation, but if something you're using can consume GraphQL, odds are you can do some pretty neat things with it. So it really brings us to what we're talking about today, and that's GraphQL, of course. Just some objectives before we get started. We're going to start by defining what GraphQL is, where it comes from. We'll figure out how Sitecore exposes GraphQL, cover some syntax and some use cases along the way. And then we'll try out some other endpoint operations. So the main things that people show usually are queries, but there are a couple other operation types as well. You can do subscriptions, which actually allow you to subscribe to operations with a WebSocket, and you could get requests pushed to you. The other operation type is a mutation, which allows you to push data and cause a change in the endpoint. So really quickly, where did GraphQL come from? And the answer is came from these guys. It was originally developed as an in-house project. It was open source and publicly released in 2015. It's since been transitioned to the GraphQL Foundation, creating sort of a neutral home for the project to live, hopefully to encourage vendor adoption. And I will say that probably 90% of the reason why I still have a Facebook account at this point is sort of a thank you to Facebook. They make it harder every day. So what is GraphQL? And if you navigate to graphql.org, you're going to be greeted with this great definition on the homepage. I tried to summarize this definition myself, and it always felt like a bit of a parody of this definition. And this is the definition you're going to see. So what I really want to do is, with this presentation, is take this definition piece by piece, and just unpack each different piece and talk about how talk about it in general, and then how it relates to us with Sitecore. So the first part of the definition is GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for filling those queries with your existing data. So what this says to me is really GraphQL is two things, and the first of which is it's a runtime. And we're really fortunate. Sitecore has built out this runtime for us, so we don't really have to worry about it too much. It's currently shipping with Sitecore JSS, and there's no massive migration or separate database that you need to install to get started. Getting started with GraphQL is really just a package install away and defining an endpoint. So there's really low friction in getting started to use it. Secondly, it's a query language. It has its own syntax. It looks a lot like JSON. And one of my favorite features of GraphQL is the requests and responses are the same shape. And I'll kind of show that when we start getting some demos. But the shape of it, it has a predictable response structure in the response. So, and then additionally, requests can and should be parameterized. The JSS docs call this out. They basically don't want you building your own queries by hand. To pass in arguments, there are functions for passing in variables, and you should just be leveraging those and not actually building out your queries manually, which I embarrassingly did my first time when I was building out a component. So I just wanted to call that out. So here's an example of a GraphQL query. This is sort of like the shorthand, notation. Sort of just a general query. This isn't Sitecore specific. It actually comes from that URL at the bottom. And that article is really worth reading. Has a lot of good breakdowns of queries and syntax. So we have two components on this query. We have fields, and these are really the things we're trying to select. And then we also have arguments, which we can pass in. We can pass arguments to fields. Coming from a back-end developer, someone who's written C# for a while, it feels really awkward passing arguments to fields, but in GraphQL you can. So this whole kind of query is just selecting a single human of ID 1000, and selecting the name and height fields on them, and then we're passing in a unit of measure here for what format we want the height in. Here's another example, same source. This one is sort of the longhand sort of notation for query. You're gonna be using this quite a bit as you start wiring up GraphQL queries to your components. And the new components of this query, there's an operation type. So we're selecting data here. So this is a query. If you were doing a subscription or a mutation, that's where you put that type there. Second new component of this is there's an operation name. This is optional, but you should use it because you're going to see it throughout your code as you're debugging things. So it's definitely worth doing so you can trace back queries if you need to. And then finally, we have some variable definitions. And these allow us to pass in different variables into our query and then use those variables inside of our query. So in this case, there's an episode variable here of type episode. And then it's getting passed into this hero field, and that's being used. So yeah, those are two different examples of a GraphQL query. The second part of the definition is GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of the data in your API. And it really does this through typings. The runtime is responsible for generating typings for all of the data types in your endpoint. In Sitecore, in Sitecore specific, these are your templates that are included in your solution or included in that endpoint. Each typing contains a name, fields, and each field has a field type. Typings can and are inherited through interfaces. And you'll see that if you actually look at the schema that gets generated, and you can actually browse that schema. If you have an endpoint defined, you can go to the endpoint/schema, and you can actually see, you'll get this huge output depending on how many templates you have. And you can see everything that's generating for you. And if we have time, maybe we'll pull it up when we get into the demos. So yeah. Here's a couple of examples of some really basic typings. These are just some generic typings. So on the left-hand side, we have a type employee, has 3 properties, ID, name, and job title. And then we have sort of the implementation example on the right, where we have an interface named entity, and then our person type is in implementing that entity interface. The next part of the definition is gives clients the power to ask exactly what they need and nothing more. And it makes it easy to evolve APIs over time. And for this, I really just want you to think of GraphQL as SQL for graphs. And as kind of drive that home a little bit, here's just an example of a SQL query. We're selecting a subset of fields here. So we're selecting ID, title, and description. And then we're doing a join for some author information. So we're getting the author name on this join. And this is roughly what this query would look like in GraphQL. So this GraphQL query we would do, we're searching every post, we're getting the ID and description from it, and then we're getting those fields from the author that's linked to this post. So that's sort of what it would look like. And I want you to think of SQL or GraphQL typings as sort of like SQL tables. They can evolve and change over time. So there's another sort of just a hypothetical example here. So say we publish this application, it has this typing published, and then our query is on the right-hand side. We're querying against this typing, and we're getting all the albums in this, in our endpoint, and we're getting the name and then our different like band members that are associated with that album. So when we go to make a change to this, maybe we want to add some new functionality to this endpoint. We want to add support for maybe producers that were associated with this album, or awards or something like that. This old query is just going to continue to work, like your SQL table, your SQL query would. You're not going to break this query because you're adding new fields or anything like that. So it really sort of just eliminates the need to version APIs like we have in the past and stuff like that. And the last part of the definition is it enables powerful developer tools. So Sitecore JSS has a developer tool built in. It's based on an open source library called GraphQL. It's optional, but it's really useful. This is something you're probably going to want running on your local, but not necessarily running in production. So you can enable it per environment, and there are rules in place already to do that. So this is what it looks like. Has a dark theme because those are all the rage these days. So that's pretty cool. I was actually jealous of Anastasia. Hers is white. I'm kind of jealous. So I don't know how she did that. I'll have to ask. But yeah, so I'm not just going to tease you with a picture of GraphQL. I just want to jump over some demos and explore that interface a little bit, and then we will dig into some demos that I prepared for sort of a takeaway for this. So this is GraphQL. And the first thing I want to really call out here is it comes with some placeholder text and stuff like that. It has some shortcut keys in here that you can use, and so I'm just going to delete this for now. We're not really going to deal with that. And then the first thing I want to really call out is just the docs on the right-hand side. So you can pop that open, and you get access to schema that every query operation that's defined, and all the root types. So the first one I want to take a look at is just the query type. And then it gets listed, it opens up the screen where you can explore all the different fields that are defined on the query. And then the first one I want to take a look at is just the item field. And then when we click into it, we get a more descriptive version of this, this field. We can tell that it accepts 3 different arguments. Each one of them are nullable, which means they're optional. And we can also see the return type. So before we write one of these, I just want to click on the type and just call out a couple different fields in here. So we can see the first one I want to call out is there's a field let you pass in a name as a string value, and it returns type item field. And then there's also children as well. And if you've written backend code for a while, I've written code over and over again where I've filtered by things that have presentation and things that have certain template ID, and there's sort of functionality in there to filter by those 2 types by children. So there's a lot of functionality built into this for you. There's even some pagination values in there as well. So additionally, there's a way to select the name field in here. So there's that field as well. So I just really want to start by writing a basic item query. We're not going to provide any arguments to start off. So I'm just going to do item, and I'm not going to pass any of those arguments that it accepts. And I'm just going to select the name field and see what this gets me. So hit play here, and like I mentioned before, the request and response structure are similar. I mean, they're exact here. So this is sort of the same structure that we get in our, that we've provided in our request. So the Sitecore item is pretty neat, but I've never really used it personally. So, let's provide one of those arguments and rescope this query. So let's provide a path, and let's just do the home item, and I'll hit play. And glad I have glasses. So yeah, we can rescope this, and now we're getting an actual item back. We're getting the home item back. So that's exactly what we want there. I want to take a look at Sitecore real quick and just see the different fields that are on that home item. I think this is pretty stock install. So this is probably a sample item here. So the home item's of type sample item, and we have two different fields here. So we have the title field and then a text field. So what I want to do is just select these. I want to select the title field. So I'm just going to request it directly using that field field. And I'm going to provide a name, and then I'm just going to do title here. And I'm just going to select the value of this. It returns a complex type, and for complex types, you need to provide some subfields to select, at least one. So with this, we should be getting our title back, but it's kind of, the description for it isn't really helpful in the response. We're getting field, and if we wanted to select another field, it wouldn't really work. So we need to provide it. We need to provide an alias for this. So the way to do that is you can just type in here and then semicolon, and you can give this a name. So in our response, we'll actually get the title field here, and we'll be able to select multiple fields without conflicting with each other. So additionally, we can also select the children of the item, and this returns an array of items, and we can just select fields on those as well. So I'm gonna hit play, and we get our array of children, and we just get the name field on all those. So that's just some basic syntax. I really want to just jump over the demos I prepared, and we'll explore more syntax through those as well. So what I've really done is I've built out this demo site, and I put it up on GitHub, and I'll link it at the end. But there's, the text here really says, use the navigation at the top to, navigate the demos, but the navigation, is pretty blank. And it's not because I didn't finish it on the plane or something like that, but I actually think headers and global things like this are really great candidates for using GraphQL. So we're going to implement this query to sort of unlock the demos a little bit. So this is roughly what we're going to end up looking like. So we want the title here, and then our demos drop down. So to prepare for this, I sort of built out that demo site's entire Sitecore JSS site as well. And I've built out a content node here in Sitecore, and we have two fields on it. So we have a site title, and we have some demo links. And my demo links is just a tree list of app routes, essentially. So I have it sourcing at my home node, and so all these are of type app route. And then if we jump over to some React component that I've prepared as well, I currently have the query just hard-coded in my class here. You'll probably want to pull it out to a different file or something like that, but you don't get the, I wanted the auto reload as well, so that's why I have it sort of embedded here. So just to scroll down a little bit, so what we're really expecting here is we're expecting a header query prop to be passed into our little React component here, and then we're going to look at the header field on that, and then we're going to look at the site where we should be expecting a site title, and then an array of demo links from that as well, and then we'll be looking at the target items from that. So let's start writing that query. I have a different graphical interface here just for my Sitecore JSS, my SUGCON demo site. So what I'm going to just do is start writing that query. And basically, we need to use the sort of the longhand version of the query because we want to be passing some arguments to it. So I didn't show this, sorry. So I'm actually wrapping my component with this GraphQL data class. I'm handling the prop name here, and then we're also passing in this site settings ID, which is just the ID of the Sitecore item. So I'm going to go over to Sitecore real quick and just copy that ID. And yeah, so now we can get started. So we're going to do query, use the longhand version of the syntax, type navbar here, and then for arguments, we're going to pass in that ID parameter. And we're just going to use type string, and then we can start writing our query. So we're going to be requesting a single item to source this data from. And the first thing to really notice here is if you don't actually use, a variable, then it's going to sort of like start yelling at you a little bit. So we're going to select that one field, and if you don't use a variable in your variable list, it's not going to work. If you're not actually using them. So we need to pass that through to actually have this query function. So we're just going to pass this into our our path, and now we should be getting a node. So we get the Sitecore node because we're not actually passing a value for this yet. In order to do this in graphical, we need to pop open this variables window down here, and we can pass in an object for all the variables. And if you click, like control, space, you get some autocomplete down here, just based on the query that you've written up top. So we're going to just pass in our ID value, and just going to pass in that single ID. So now we should be getting our site settings node, and we are. Cool. So now I just want to take a look at that site settings node one more time, and it's of type site settings template. And one thing I didn't really show before, but in this interface, if you go to query and then just click the item, you actually can see all the implementations of item down here. So we have there's typings that are being generated for all those Sitecore templates that are in my JSS app. So we have this site settings template down here, and we're going to use that to use like an inline fragment to take the fields off that object directly. So the syntax for that is just ... on site settings template, and then from here we should be able to really just request the fields directly off of the site settings template. So if you click into it, there's some search in here as well. If you're looking for a particular field and not quite sure what the name of it is, so you can search for site title in here. So we're able to access that now in our fragment, and we just want the value of this. And then we should hit play, and we're getting our site title back. So that's perfect. And one thing I always forget when I'm doing this is we actually want this to be named header. So I intended to add more data in here, and it's also future-proofing it as well if I want to add a little more data to my query. So I'm going to come up here and just paste this in. Hit save, and with any luck, we should have our title. So that's perfect. So now let's handle the demo links. Those are very similar. It's a different field type, so we'll need to request it a little differently. And one thing I learned when I was accidentally doing this is search will actually search nested things in here as well. So if you're on just a query or something like that, you kind of know your field name, you can actually search for demo links in here, and it'll actually have the template and then the actual field on it as well. So something I accidentally managed to do, but I thought it was pretty neat. So it's of type multi-list field, and then in here we should have some properties. So we have target items and target IDs. So we'll just do the target items, and we'll go in our inline fragment here, and we'll go to demo links, and then we'll want to select from the target items field, and then these provide some access to the fields. And then we need to use another inline fragment to actually get the page title off the app route that we have defined. So each one of these has a page title defined on it. So we want to request that field. So you can have nested inline fragments, so you can do on app route. And then in here, we should have our access to our page title. and then we just need the value of that. And if I hit play, we should have a list of all our different objects in here, all our different app routes. The one thing we're missing is we're missing the URL for each one of them. So I'm just going to go above the inline fragment, and we can do it inside, but its URL is built on the item object. So I'm just going to add it in there. So now we have links. We have links and page titles for each one of our nav items. So we should be able to select this query, take this query out, and just paste it into our component over here. I'll hit save, and now we should have our demo links drop down here as well. So I prepared a bunch of demos, and I have this up on GitHub. And the first one is really just something we already covered, just like an example item query. I have a little description here as well. I have this sweet CSS marquee going on in here just for fun. I did, fun's in the title, so I had to provide some fun. So it's just an example of doing that. You can see how it's wired up and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. So the second one I really prepared is there's ways to have multiple queries on your React components. Maybe you have you need to execute multiple queries. And really to do that, there's some built-in ways to do that. It's built into Apollo React. This is just one way of doing it. You can do it in another way as well. So you use the compose function. You pass in your GraphQL queries. You sort of provide different names to them. So you have first query and second query, and these get passed in as props to your React component. So this is just a really basic React component. One thing to be aware of is you might get the data. You'll get the data differently at different times. So you need to make sure you actually have data in both variables. So the queries aren't really worth talking about here. They're just getting the name of items. So the next demo I have is example of an integrated query. We didn't talk about integrated queries that much or at all. But here's just sort of an example of one. When you use an integrated query, these queries are stored on Sitecore items. They're actually stored in the rendering, and you're actually provided two variables on this. So you get a data source variable. This is the component itself, and then you get the context item, and this is the item that this template's applied to. So you get access to both of those, and you can really use this to change the route data that you get back from JSS. So I have an example on the right-hand side, really just a component using this query. So we get this data source object back, and then we get our context item back, and we get fields in both. And then sort of without it, you just get the data source values there in your fields prop. So if you need to access the current item or something like that, this might be a good use case. So there's probably other ways to do it, but you can definitely do it this way as well. And then I have some more fun demos here. So I wanted to really showcase other operation types in GraphQL. And this is an example of doing a subscription with GraphQL. And this is really doing 3 subscriptions. So we're subscribing to several different operations that are built in already. So I'm just going to copy this real quick. So this subscription lets us listen to item added events. We can take this query over here and paste it in. And then I'm just going to navigate back to my query object. And then we can navigate inside the subscription in here, and we can see that there's 4 different things in here. So we can listen to item added events, item deleted, and item saved. And then there's publishing status as well down below. So you can actually run these in here as well. It's perfectly valid to do. So if you have WebSockets enabled on your machine, this will work. When you hit play, you'll get like an error message. It almost looks like an error message, but just sort of a status message. And when you go into Sitecore and actually add an item, and add another sample item, because you can never have too many sample items. So when you go in there, you'll actually get the added event here. So you'll get this in graphical. And then my activity log will have that data as well. So this first example is, this first line is just a job running. I think there's a job running. It's updating the timestamp, so that's unrelated. But then these other three really are, so we have our sample item name here. The title that was, the field that was changed is listed on the right-hand side, and then this is a saved event. So we have two saved events for title, and then we have one for like workflow, I think. Just only system fields got changed, so I'm sort of filtering those out. And then we finally get the item added event. And then we're still getting more from that job running. So I have all the different subscriptions in here. So there's item added, and then one thing to note is the item saved event actually provides access to the fields that have changed, or so the item saved actually gives you the changes that were made. I think you get access to the old values as well, so that could be something neat that you could see the fields that get updated and stuff like that in an interface. And we'll also preface that the JSS docs really say don't use these on your CD servers right now. Probably don't scale that well, but these can be used to like enhance the author experience, or come up with an activity graph or something like that for editors and stuff like that. So that's subscriptions, and then sort of to build on top of that, I built a chat using GraphQL, sort of a proof of concept, but I just wanted to showcase mutations and subscriptions. So the mutation is we're creating a item every time someone enters a new message to the chat, and we're just going to fill in some fields from it. So I'm just going to copy this real quick, make it a little easier to see. So we get we're going to call this mutation here called created event, create item. And then we can actually browse in here and see all the different mutations we're allowed to do in here. So there's created item, delete item, update item. So all these are valid operations, and we just have 4 variables in here. So we're passing a name for the item, where we want the item to live as the parent, the message that the user sent, and then the username. We're just constantly sending the username up every time someone chats right now. Let's just go check that out. I'm gonna chat with myself. So yeah, I just have a little prompt here for username and hit submit. And I implemented like this little chat interface. So I'll open up that window. And I'm not Adam here. Yeah, and when I type in a message, what it's actually going and doing is it's creating an item, and then we're using our subscription to listen to the item created event. And if the username isn't the current username that the user provided, I have a little iOS style coloring in here, so your own messages are blue, but the other person's are gray. So we can chat back and forth. So cool. Yeah, so that's functional. And I implemented that as sort of like an experiment to see what I could really do with GraphQL. I didn't write any backend code. We're just using the built-in subscriptions and the mutations to handle that. Going into our component, actually our app route. So we have our chat room item here, and then we have our component under here, and we're just creating our messages under here. So there's lots of, just have a username and message field. Obviously, you need to be, authorized as someone, as a user that can create items, but just to sort of make an example to showcase the functionality here. So these also these all work in integrated mode as well. So if you run an integrated, you'll have no problem there as well. So one thing I want to call out back in the multiple queries that I forgot to cover is if you load up the multiple queries in connected mode, so this is connected mode over here, and look at the network tab. So you and hit refresh. You'll notice that you get you'll get all the requests, but you're not getting there's 3 queries that are running when this page loads, and so it's actually batching those for you in connected mode. Like those components don't know about each other, but it's bundling them all together and executing them in the same request. That's a little optimization that gets done for you. And then in connected mode, you're going to see those queries aren't going to be executed at all because this first page is server-side rendered. So if you're in a situation where you're using multiple queries and stuff like that, it's going to, in an integrated mode, the performance will be there. You're not going to have a million different requests firing off. So. Yeah, and so those are the demos I prepared, and then just a bunch of GraphQL logos. Yeah, I didn't even mean for that to happen. It just happened by itself. So just sort of in summary, this GraphQL provides a lot of built-in functionality that you can really leverage out of the box. There's support for more than just querying data. Subscriptions and mutations are really powerful, and you can do some really neat things with them. GraphQL is a great tool for testing and writing queries, and it's just exploring endpoints in general. And then the sample code's up here if you want. I just made it public before this demo, so feel free to pull that and check it out. Just quick shout out to Lamarre. They provided a lot of support for this, for me during this presentation, so really appreciate it. And then you can find me on Slack and Twitter if you're interested in following me. And then thank you to the sponsors.
Short question.
Yeah.
Can you go back 2 slides?
Yep.
For the yes.
This one?
Yeah. I meant the link to GitHub.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that the chat demo was really clever. That was cool. Whenever you were showing off the URL stuff, are there options on like whenever you select URL to select like a short URL or kind of link manager functionality?
Yeah, I think there's some arguments that you can pass in there to format the URLs different ways. So it does accept. So it does accept some arguments as well. So you can format it differently. So it has some URL options in here, and if you click in here, you can just browse. These are the sort of the same rules, the same fields we can pass in backend. So you can disable language embedding and language and stuff like that. So yeah.
Adam, when you were actually building out your GraphQL queries, you actually give them a name, use that in your React app. The step that I missed was actually where do you actually use that query? Where did you actually paste it in the React app?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because you need to use that disconnected, right? Yeah, or connected, but
so it's only these are only running connected, so you're talking about this name.
More about the React, because this is the query that you're actually building out to test it, and then you're using it in the app. But I didn't see where you actually did that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's actually being passed in down at the bottom using that GraphQL data class. So. Scroll down. So
that's where the name is?
Yep. So the GraphQL, and then this.
And you have that defined in a constant.
So the constant variable is up top, and then we're giving this a prop name here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. The question is regarding the queries in the field. So they kind of names of Sitecore fields, and if you change Sitecore field or remove Sitecore field, how do you know that your query is broken, and how can you track the integrity?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. If you're using inline fragments, I think there's a way to verify your queries against the typings. So but if you changed a field name or something like that, I think it would just drop off. So that's something to be aware of.
Hi. In terms of performance, how do the queries cope?
I didn't have any problems with them.
Yeah, even when you build more complex queries.
Yeah, I mean, mine were always pretty performant. Like we were selecting, the item directly by ID or path by, so that's just so.
What is it using behind the scenes to query the data? Is it using index or directly?
So I think that's just an item request.
It's an item request.
Yeah, so there is a different, if you can search the content index as well.
Really?
I didn't show that, and maybe I should have. So if you click, query in here, it's actually not on this one. So if you click it over here, so you can enable these things by default, to have it disabled by default. So this is just an item lookup. So I think that's the same time as an item lookup would in Sitecore. But then if you want to do some more complex things, like you want to search for your content index, you can use this search field here, and you can pass in different conditions and stuff like that. So you can use Solr, through this. So if you want to build some components that were more dynamic, you would leverage that. So.
Nice. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
When you select fields and you want the value, I see you always need to put value inside the name of a field. Is there a way to concatenate to have the value as just the field equals the value inside your result instead of field.value?
Yeah. I don't think there is. Correct me if I'm. Yeah, I don't think there is. Yeah, I think it's nested. Yeah, I think it's nested. I think it's always nested like that. So. It is, yeah. So you can do, so you can get different types of values in here. So let's look at this. You can do the rendered in here. I think value is the raw value, and you can get the rendered value as well. So there's lots of different things in here that you can select. So yeah, you can also control click in here as well to actually browse them, and then you can just browse the type. So these are all the different properties that you could select on this. So.
As far as securities are concerned, have you done anything with securing items so that only certain users can see them and querying for those items?
Yeah, so I think I haven't personally done it, but I think that's where, so when you define a API key, you define the user that impersonates. So you would use a user that can only access the items that you wanted to be, queried. So I think that's how you would do that. When you have the API token, obviously you can see that. So, someone could grab that and just execute their own queries. So that's really, that user impersonation really, helps you there. So.
I think I know the answer, but is GraphQL, is that only available with JSS, which means consumption-based license?
Yes. Okay. I mean, I don't know anything. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. No, you don't need a license. Sorry. It ships as a GraphQL ships as a separate binary, and you can pick one for a couple of binaries, probably. It's not dependent on JSS or a license.
Oh, so you can put it in any 91 and above?
902. Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Nice, thank you. Oké.
Ja.
Ska vi färdig med det här?
Ja.